Hey, everybody. My name is Chris Lazarus. Thank you so much for taking the time out on your Thursday evening. It's 8:30 at night. It's not easy to do this, but I did want to make sure that we're able to get some good information to y'all um, on how to start investing in real estate. So I'm going to break this down. This is going to be about an hour presentation. We go through some information, how I started in real estate investing, and then we're going to talk a little bit about, we'll open it up to some Q&A. And I'm going to take the last 25, 30 minutes or so and do some Q&A on what your concerns are. So um, I'll tell you a little bit about Sellect Realty. So our company is, we started in 2007, so we're in our 11th year. We ended up becoming the first traditional brokerage in the state of Georgia to join the Forbes Real Estate Council. I was the first broker to be invited. We have over 100 real estate agents throughout Metro Atlanta, and we serve everything from the traditional buyer, seller, all the way to the major investor. So we've got experience doing quite a bit when it comes to investing in real estate. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. Um, that'll work. There we go. I am the chief operating officer and principal broker. I wear a lot of hats, and I started in real estate in 2010. So from taking over the company in 2015, I've grown this company from 67 million to over 100 million in the last 2 years with the help of a great staff and team, built an amazing culture. And as you can see, my vertical jump, probably not the best. I am only 5'6". So why real estate investing? Well, it all starts with a question. That question is, what do you want your future to look like? So if you sit back, close your eyes, think of where you want to be 40 years from now. How does that look? What are you doing? What's your family life look like? Where are you traveling? Are you on the ocean? You got yourself a nice yacht? Pardon the Boston accent. Maybe it's a second home in the woods. Get yourself a little getaway. Or maybe it just comes down to seeing the world. And maybe you'd like to do that in style. All of these things are not out of reach if you plan correctly. So getting into real estate, there's different revenue streams. So you could go the career route. This chart is a breakdown of about how much time you have to commit to each different revenue stream. So the career route, that's doing what I'm doing. It's 100% career. It's a full-time job. And it's a commission-only industry. It's not easy. It's fun. It's flexible. And for those of us that are able to make it work, there's nothing better in the world than being able to be in this industry. Then you can get into wholesaling. Now, what is wholesaling? A lot of people don't know. Even real estate agents don't know how wholesaling works. Wholesaling is when a person goes out and finds a great deal on a house. Maybe they're finding a house that's worth $100,000 and they have it under contract for $60,000. So then they may never buy that property. What they're going to do is they're going to try and find somebody else to buy it. And they're going to make a spread on that contract. So if they have it under contract for $60,000, they're going to sell that contract for $15,000, $20,000 to somebody who's going to buy the house at $80,000. Keep in mind, the house is still worth $100,000, and they're going to make $20,000 just off of getting that contract. That's wholesaling. Wholesaling has a huge time commitment, mainly because it takes up so much time to find the properties. You have to prospect. That's all that industry is. Then you get into the fix and flips. Here's where our HGTV fans love real estate. So fix and flips are not investing. You can invest money into a flip, but doing it consecutively, that's not investing in real estate. That is running a rehab business or a renovation business. That's where you go in, you acquire the property, you restore the property, and then you sell it at a higher value. Now, why is this not investment? Well, I invest in my business all the time, but I don't consider Select Realty an investment for me. I consider that's my career. Okay. That's a job. That's the same way fix and flips work. You have crews to manage, you have financing to manage, you have all sorts of different angles. You have books, accounting, all of that is involved with running a business. That's what you're doing. You're not going out and just handing a fix and flip company money and letting them give you a return on that money. That would be investing. And at that scale, it's more like speculation than it is investing. That requires a huge time commitment. So you're looking at about 90% of your time is going to be devoted to running that. And this is based off of your free time. This is 90% of your daily activity is going to be devoted to fix and flips. So this is another full-time job. Then you get into financing. Now, how do you get involved in financing in the real estate industry? Well, you lend money to the people doing the fix and flips, or you lend money to the people doing the wholesaling. You do either bridge loans. A bridge loan is going to allow a wholesaler to buy the house and then sell the house again. It's a loan until they sell it. So usually 30 days or less. And then you have the fix and flips. Those are construction loans. Those are called hard money loans. Basically, it's outside of a bank, and there's still terms of financing, but it requires lots of time to get the lawyers set up and do your due diligence on the person that you're lending to. So it requires not as much as wholesaling, but probably about 40% of your time is going to be devoted to figuring out who you're lending money to and getting the lawyers to draft up the paperwork and then hitting different milestones throughout the process. Then you come down to the least time intensive, and that's going to be just owning rental property. This is my bread and butter. I love rental property. So how do you start? We're talking today primarily about rental property. I'm not going in depth into wholesaling, financing, or fixing and flipping. If you want to know about careers, I can talk to you about that later. But there's two easy ways to start investing in real estate. One is asset conversion. And asset conversion is taking a property that you already own and convert that into an income producing property. Basically, you own a house as a single family residence. Now you're going to move out and you're going to keep it and put a tenant in there. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Asset acquisition, that's going out and finding a property specific for the specific purpose of placing a tenant and making money off of it. So there's two different ways you can go about it. We're going to talk about both, and we'll talk about asset acquisition first. So buying investment property outright. This is just going out tomorrow, hiring a real estate agent saying, you know what, Susie Q, I want to go ahead and buy a piece of real estate to put a property in. So how does financing work? So generally, you're going to come in and you need a FICO score of at least 650. All of these terms, this is for going with a traditional mortgage lender, Fannie or Freddie backed, not going and doing any obscure like hard money lending, because you can find that too if you don't have some of this stuff. But this is generally going to give you the best rate. So a 650 or higher credit score, you're going to be looking at a minimum down payment of 10%, 10 to 15%, with 25% down being the sweet spot for the best rate. When you do this, you're going to be looking at about a 0.5 percentage point higher in your interest rate. So if your owner occupant financing is going at 4%, you're going to be looking at about 4.5% for investor grade financing. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. We all have a debt to income ratio. If you are making $10,000 a month, your debts cannot exceed $4,500 a month in payments. And that is because, and the reason why is you got to be able to make all your payments. So the mortgage company is going to want to make sure that you're under 45%. Now, if you're 45% is say you're right at 45% with your mortgage and student loan and everything else that you have, you can't take on the additional debt of the property. That 45% has to include any mortgage, it has to include HOA, it has to include taxes, etc. So that 45% is your total, including the property that you want to purchase. Then you need cash reserves. Cash reserves need to be about 2 months worth of property expenses, HOA, taxes, insurance, and mortgage payments. Financing is generally available for up to 10 properties. You can own as many properties as you want, but you can't have loans on all of them. You can usually finance up to 10 of them. When you're first starting out and doing this, rental income does not count towards your DTI. So then we get into asset conversion. I got my little hermit crab there because when they outgrow their shells, it's time to move on. So be a hermit crab, but keep the shell behind you. That's the deal with this. So to convert a currently owned asset, to convert your primary residence, your home, into a rental property, the first thing you have to do is check with your mortgage lender and make sure that it qualifies. Okay, you have to make sure that if you place a tenant in that property, they're not going to have a due on sale clause and call your note because it's occupant grade financing. But if you check with your lender and your lender says, yeah, you've been there plenty of time, you can lease out the property, then you're going to check with your mortgage provider. Well, then you're going to keep your old one when you outgrow this. That's the idea, is you leave a trail of rental properties behind you. So you're going to purchase a new property to live as a primary home. You're going to rent out the old home instead of selling it. And in this case, you usually can count the rent against your DTI. You can count 75% of the rent against your debt to income ratio. So this requires obtaining a lease and getting the first month's rent. And you usually do that during the purchasing process of your next house. There's ways that you just have a contingency in that contract that says this purchase is contingent upon me leasing out my current property. So 75% of the rent that can count towards your DTI. So if you're renting it out at a profit, you may be able to either break even or show additional income to qualify for your next mortgage. Your costs your cost on this include financing for the new home, any maintenance required to put the tenant in your house, but your financing terms are going to be much better, anywhere from 3.5% to 20% down, depending upon your personal financial situation. But I'll go into in just a second next, I'm going to tell you about what I did. So here's what I did. First off, we bought a house. We always knew that when we bought the house, we were always going to keep the house because we want the equity to appreciate, and we wanted, hang on. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the ways I got into real estate investing. So first off, I always knew that my exit strategy for the home was going to be, okay, so the easiest way to enter into real estate investing, this is what I did. This is an asset conversion strategy. I always knew before buying the house that I was going to keep it forever. I wanted the equity, I wanted the long-term appreciation, and I didn't want to pay for it. I wanted somebody else to pay for it. So the first thing I did is I bought a home, and we did that using occupant grade financing. We were in college. We took advantage of a lot of the government programs that were going on at the time. So 0 down payment, and we were able to get a great deal while the economy was tanking. Wasn't as good of a deal as I thought because it continued to go down because we bought in '08 and it dropped and dropped for the next 3 years. But it didn't matter because I knew the rental market in Athens, Georgia was strong because of the university. And our cost basis didn't matter on this because our goal was to keep this forever. So what's a few $1,000s over the course of a lifetime? It's nothing. The goal is getting the mortgage paid down. So first off, we bought the home, we lived in it. We bought it using occupant grade financing. And we lived there for 4 years. We lived there the entire duration of my wife's graduate school. So she went to UGA's vet med program. We lived there for the entire time. And when we were ready to outgrow, now we had made sure that our mortgage we were able to rent it afterwards before we got it. So when most mortgages are going to require you to live in the house for between 2 and 5 years. So we lived in the home. Then we leased the home. We moved out and we put a tenant in there. And that was one of the best things that we ever did. Now we moved to North Carolina for a little bit, so we rented there. And then we moved back to Atlanta. We weren't in North Carolina to justify purchasing there. When we moved back to Atlanta, we bought another house. We did this twice. After we bought the second house, we bought a third. So our second house was in Ackworth. It was in the Cobb County section of Ackworth off Wade Green. And after we bought that, we lived there for a few years. And when we were ready, the kids got a little, or when we, I guess, James our oldest was about 3 when we were moving in. So we had a newborn and we said, you know what, it's time for us to move to the location we want to be with better schools. So we went and found a new house. We put it under contract and we used a contingency on lease for our existing house in Ackworth. So we had to place a tenant in that Ackworth house as a qualifier for purchasing the house in East Cobb. That's where we live now. So we got a tenant in there, we leased it, and our mortgage on that property was very inexpensive. It was $900 a month, including taxes and insurance. We bought it in 2013, just out of the recession, for about $140,000, which was awesome because now it's worth almost $100,000 more. And so we've got appreciation there. But not only do we have the appreciation, the tenant is paying our mortgage. So having the tenant pay the mortgage is fantastic. But not only do they pay the mortgage, our rent is like $1,400 a month. So we have $500 a month extra. Now, in qualifying for our new house, we had the lease. We knew that we were going to have $500 a month extra. We had the first check in hand, and we gave that to our lender. Our lender was able to take 75% of that rent. So out of the $1,400, they were able to take like $1,100 of that rent and apply that towards our debt to income ratio. So immediately what that did is that wiped out the $900 a month debt in the mortgage, taxes, and insurance on the Ackworth house. And it gave us like an extra $200 or $300 a month in qualifying for the next house. Now, when we bought the next house, that one was it was $270,000. So that house cost us about $600 per month more than the house that we were in. The rent offsets that, kept it even. So our cost of living stayed relatively the same because we were able to have a tenant in there. Our cost on the house is maintenance. We're going to have to put a new HVAC in that one soon. We've had to do that in the Athens house, but that stuff's going to happen. The tenants are building equity for us. The tenants are they're paying for a lot of the maintenance in the margin, right? So we do make a little bit on each house. The Athens house, not so much. Some years I make money. Recently, I think it costs us like $25 a month just because the HOA fees have gone up. But small stuff like that, we pay maintenance. And the idea, for me at least, is if I'm going to put and max out a Roth IRA at $5,000 a month or at $5,000 a year, I would rather have that $5,000 go into maintenance on 2 properties that are going to accumulate all of the wealth up to the whatever equity they're going to have in 30 years. So over the last few years, I've already watched the equity appreciate significantly on both of them. I'd like to see where that goes in 30 years. I think it's going to be much more than a Roth IRA is ever going to do for me. And my background's in finance. So I studied finance in college. And I was a financial advisor for a little while. I had my 7, my 66 before coming into real estate. I prefer a hard asset. Just my thing. Maybe I'm skewed from being in this industry for a while, but that's how this is what I did, right? So we leased the house, we bought the next house, and we left a trail of properties behind us. So there's some costs that need to be accounted for. In all situations, you're going to need to account for maintenance, taxes, insurance, and management, all of them. Your management is going to cost you between 8 to 10% per month, and most professional managers are going to charge to place your tenant, and then they're going to charge you a renewal fee. So that's going to bring your total cost of management between 11 and 15%. Your property maintenance, it's going to vary depending upon the property. You're going to want to acquire durable, well-built homes that are easy to maintain and they're a favorite of investors because they often have lower maintenance costs. Right? If you don't have to worry about the siding falling off or the windows rotting out, your maintenance costs are going to be much lower. Now, taxes are going to be higher on a rental property than they are on your primary residence. The reason for that is called a homestead exemption. So most counties in Georgia have a homestead exemption. The way it works in Cobb County is we have a floating homestead exemption. In Cobb County, there are 3 buckets that you pay taxes into each year. You have the school fund, the fire fund, and the general fund. The general fund is how the county operates. When you buy a house in Cobb, you get a homestead exemption if that's your primary residence. So if you bought a house in 1970 for $40,000, then that house that's worth $300,000 now, you're not paying an assessed value on the $300,000. You're paying on the $40,000 that you bought it. That's how the general fund works, or that's how the homestead exemption works. The tax or the fire fund and the school fund, you're still paying into until you hit your senior exemption. Cobb County has a senior exemption where you stop paying into the school fund. Fulton does not. Cherokee does. So it varies by county. So when you're on a rental property, you don't get a homestead exemption. So you pay into all 3 buckets. So your taxes are higher. Insurance you're going to need also. As a homeowner, you have a homeowner's insurance policy, which covers the property, the dwelling, the grounds, and your property inside your personal property. So your furniture, your jewelry, the stuff like that, and whatever limitations you have in that policy. But it covers some of that stuff. The landlord policy does not. The landlord policy is going to cover all of the outside dwelling. It's going to cover the property, the systems, flooding, hail, all the normal stuff that a typical homeowner's insurance policy covers, but it's not going to cover any personal property. Now, to offset the personal property, you're going to pay to have insurance at higher liability levels because you have people in the house that you're responsible for having a safe environment for. So in the event somebody gets hurt, you want insurance to cover that. So the minimum insurance that you should have is a $300,000 liability policy. You really should have about $1 million per offense or higher because $300,000 isn't going to cover an ambulance ride. This stuff is expensive. So you want to make sure that you're properly insured if you're going to be a property investor. there's not much difference between a $300,000 and $1 million liability insurance. There's just not, because the actuarial tables are based off of the likelihood that an event's going to happen. Vacancy costs are also a very real cost. So on a residential side, you're going to deal with about 1 to 2 months average vacancy. That's the time between tenants. So tenant moves out, you've got an empty property, you've got to cover the cost on that, and you've got to cover the cost on that while you're doing the following: turnkey maintenance. That's the last point. Turnkey maintenance, what that means is, if you think of a home, you turn the key, you open the door, you're ready to move in. The maintenance that gets the house to that point is called turnkey. These are things like painting the interior, replacing damaged countertops, rekeying the locks, putting in new flooring. This is turnkey stuff. So you're going to have that between every tenant. You're going to have a cleaning cost. You send the cleaning crew in. You're going to have the maintenance guys in. You're going to adjust the doors and the brackets and do the repainting and all the fun stuff. That takes about 2 to 3 weeks, depending upon how good your crew is. And then you're going to have the marketability time. Get the new get the new pictures, get the property back up on the MLS. You show it, you get the tenant, you screen the tenant, you place the tenant. Screening is another thing. We're not going to cover that today. In some instances, it's going to make sense during this turnkey period where you actually do some updates to the house, whether you go in and renovate the kitchen or the bath, things like that that are going to make the property more marketable over time. All right. So that's the gist of getting into it. There's a lot that can be covered. But I really designed this just to kind of get in and then be here to answer questions. So I got you both unmuted right now. What questions do you have about real estate investing? And like, what are you thinking?
Hey, Chris, it's Alex.
Hey, Alex.
Basically, my interests are pretty general and pretty basic. So I am looking, I'm heavily in the stock market, which I appreciate and I'm okay with, but I'm looking at, maybe trying to diversify and spread out my assets a little bit. And I think real estate's a good way to do that. I think it's a good way for me to get the most bang for my buck. My biggest concern is the amount of time I would have to put into it. I have a 13-month-old and another baby on the way.
Congratulations.
And I thank you very much. And I work long hours. So basically, I am interested in it, but my concern is just the time and the effort that it would take for me to get into it. So I would like to learn a little bit more, maybe about the I guess kind of rental companies or people that you could work with to
a property
manage
manager.
Properties. Yeah.
Okay, I'll talk on that. So I've been managing a small portfolio since about 2012. And I got into doing that because when I first started in real estate, I went hungry. There was a long time between commissions. So I managed, I've still got about 15 properties, including my own. Some of my own, some are some clients that I manage for. And if you screen a tenant correctly, there's not much time that goes into it. I go out to a property once or twice a year for a site visit or for marketing and setting it up. And then I handle a lot of rent collection and disbursement, which is all electronic. And I send that to when a tenant files a maintenance claim. I log in, I create a work order, I send it to my guys, and my guys take care of it. So for me as a manager, it's not that time consuming. And,
Mhm.
I try and do long-term leases. I don't do 12-month leases. So I'm willing to allow tenants to stay in a property longer and keep their rent the same because that reduces my churn cost. It reduces my
Sure.
turnkey maintenance, and it's less wear and tear on the property. So if I'm going through and I have a set of roommates living in a house, if I can keep them in there for, like the case of my townhouse, they're going in their 5th year. It's been grad school plus a residency. Uh,
Mhm.
I haven't had much maintenance. Like I'm not going in there in like while they're living there to replace all the carpets. I'll do that when they move out. So it's just about collecting
Mhm.
rent. And tenants want their experience to be as much like home ownership as possible, right? As long as they're not disturbing the neighbors. And whenever I'm in the area, I'll just do a drive-by of the exterior. Um, most people are pretty good. Now, here's the thing with that. The sweet spot for rentals is between $1,250 and $2,000 a month. If somebody's paying between $1,250 and $2,000 a month, they're paying enough in rent every month that they're going to care a little bit about the ownership. Now, rents have gone up. I'd probably say that's between $1,400 and $2,100 a month now. Um,
Mhm.
if they're paying $800 a month, there's a good chance that they're going to get up in the middle of the night and leave. And they're just not tied to that property because it's only $800 as a security deposit. If their credit was really bad, maybe it's
Right.
$1,600. Because you usually do 1 month's rent, security deposit, and then your first month's move-in. You may collect the last month's rent also. Um,
Mhm.
the most time-consuming part is if they stop paying. That's when you've in the state of Georgia, either the homeowner or an attorney has to go to court. A property manager can't go on behalf of the owner.
Mhm.
It could get to court, and the judge could say, "You're just the property manager. Get the hell out of here. Get me the homeowner." So the homeowner has to
Mhm.
show up, or an attorney on their behalf. So there's a lot of time involved for that. But
That's going to be fairly rare that you get to that kind of situation, right?
now, if you're in the sweet spot and you're getting good tenants, the likelihood of you doing that, it's few and far between. I've been managing since 2012. I have yet to evict somebody.
Mhm.
So there's most of your time is going to go into finding the right property and then just hiring a property manager.
Mhm. And you
And
said
because my
that
clients deal with the property even less than I do.
and you said a property manager generally will cost anywhere from 10 to 15% of
Annually.
the annual rent.
Yeah, of the annual rents.
Okay.
Because they're going to take so they're going to take the first month's rent. That's going to be a commission on rent. And then they're going to take anywhere from 8 to 10% of the monthly rent. And that's going to be their management fee. And then if there's a renewal of the lease, they usually charge, some don't charge, but most of them charge about a half month's rent if the lease renews. So in the 13th month, it's a half month. And every 13th month, it's a half month until they have to go in and place a new tenant, and it's another full month. It's the best thing you can
Gotcha.
do because there's so many legalities, and if you become a good investor and you have multiple properties, by the time you get 4 rental properties, you're now held to the same legal standards as a real estate professional, and you've been through no training.
Mhm.
So you might as well just hire a management company from the get-go, and every time you get a new door, you just add it to your portfolio. And you factor
Mhm.
that cost in.
Okay.
Because when you factor that cost in, somebody's working for you. So like the townhouse in Athens, I don't make any money on that. It like breaks even, and I think I may actually pay $25 a month because our HOA dues have gone up over the year. But it's so worth it for me because we're in let's see, we bought that in 2008. So we've owned that for 10 years, just about 10 years now. And we've had 7 years of tenants paying, or 6 years
Mhm.
of tenants paying the mortgage for us. All we've done is put in a new
Yeah.
HVAC system and a couple of disposals and a new front door. That's it. Just because the stuff wears and you got to keep up with it. So there's not much work, and that's 6 years of people paying our equity. And then and we pay more than the mortgage every month, so we overpay. So within the next 6 to 7 years, that thing should be paid off, and then that's additional cash flow every month. And we'll pump that into a different property. So as you start doing this and you pay off these mortgages, then not only do you have all that equity, but now you're just pure cash flow. So it's all a 30-year game. So the more properties you own, 30 years from now, imagine what you want your net worth to be. If you want your net worth to be $5 million or $10 million at retirement, doesn't take that much. Just start buying $250,000 properties now. For every 4 properties you have, that's $1 million now. But then you're going to have all the equity and the appreciation. So say you have 6, 7 properties 30 years from now, that's probably going to be worth about $4 to $5 million. And all you've done is place tenants for that entire time. So now 30 years from now, everything's paid off. It's all cash flowing to you. And whenever you're ready to retire, you just liquidate.
Gotcha.
And you also get the depreciation benefits on them every year.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that also kind of draws me to real estate is the tax benefits. I want to try to minimize my tax hit annually, and I know that you could write off a lot of things, a lot of costs with owning a rental home.
Yeah, you can write off a lot of costs. I mean, you can incorporate your rental home. You can do an S corp with pass through. You can do write-offs through it, marketing, all the fun stuff that goes along with any other business, because it is a business. And you get those benefits. And there's plenty of CPAs that are very good at that. Plus, you have the benefit of, you should incorporate and have the property titled in a name other than yourselves. Because if a tenant ever wants to sue you and say the property's titled as like Children Charity of Geneva or something like that, they're not going to want to file a lawsuit on that. There are plenty of big time investors that do that strategy.
That's funny. So I have another question about property managers and kind of the agreement between a homeowner and a property manager. So
sure.
My wife, before we got married, she was renting in a duplex, and it was an older place that had some issues, and it was like pulling teeth to get the property manager to come out and fix things. So, and she didn't stay there for long because we got married, but, we moved in together, but, she would have been out quickly regardless because the property managers were not taking care of the place for her. Is there a way to, as an owner, to protect yourself from, property manager who's not doing their job?
Well, in the property management agreement, it should specify what the property manager's duties are. Now, in Georgia, we have a Georgia landlord tenant handbook. And it's a different set of laws than on the real estate side. So you have real estate license law, which covers, how we work with buyers and sellers and how we're to represent them. And that it's agency law. But then when you get into tenancy, that's landlord tenant law. It's a completely different section of the code. In order to manage property in the state of Georgia, you either need a community association manager's license to manage for a community, or you need to work for a property management company as a salaried employer or employee of the owner. So say there's a hedge fund, right? And they own a lot of property. You can work as a salary employee of that hedge fund to manage them, or you need a real estate license. None of them offer training on the landlord-tenant side of the law. So this is why real estate management is highly litigious, because you do get property managers like that. You get somebody who is claiming to be a professional property manager. They're just a real estate licensee, and they're not even that great at that. And then they're just they'll place somebody and they're just going to collect rent, but they'll never do maintenance. They don't have crew. They don't have anything like that, and they gimmick the client into it. So it's up to you to be savvy, and it's up to you to interview the property manager. Now, if you need a good property manager, I have a couple that are very good. One is in Woodstock, one is in the Smyrna Vinings area. They cover most of the state of Georgia. And if you need anything outside the state, I don't know where you are now, but I have a pretty extensive network. There's an organization called NARPM, the National Association of Residential Property Managers, NARPM. You can go to narpm.org, I think, or .com, and you can find people who are active in that organization. And those are typically going to be the more knowledgeable property managers. Now, there's always the cost-benefit analysis, right? The agent that doesn't know anything about property management may only charge you 5% per month. And then you get into somebody who really knows their craft, and they're going to charge you 10% per month. And then they're going to be the ones charging you all of that. So there's the benefit. You've got the cost benefit there, and you've got to weigh that and figure out what you want and what risk you're willing to take. But I would recommend you always go with the professional, just because I've seen some really messed up crap.
Sure. So now the laws between a landlord and a tenant, they primarily are written to protect
the tenant,
the tenants, right?
Yeah. So the way that the Georgia landlord-tenant law works, believe it or not, it's actually really much in favor of the landlord, unless the landlord is like doing something grossly negligent. It does specify, though, that the landlord is responsible for making the home habitable and safe and maintaining all the systems. So, if somebody files a claim that a cabinet door is broken, that's not something I have to send somebody out for right away, right? They could either deal with it, or we'll address it at a 6-month or an annual inspection, unless the owner wants to go ahead and just have that fixed. Now, most owners want to go ahead and have that fixed because they want to keep up with the maintenance on the house. But say a fan in a bathroom went bad. Well, that I need to get out and fix, because if there's no exhaust for all the moisture, that's going to start building mildew and mold in the bathroom. So you've got this cost, you've got this benefit. Like there's a property that has, if there's a safety issue, I've got to send somebody out and deal with it. And if the owner says, oh, I don't authorize that charge, and Georgia law requires me to take care of it, the owner actually doesn't get the say in that. I have to maintain that. So there's kind of that as a downside to well, it's not really a downside of an owner. You might not like what you spend, but it has to be done. And the property manager keeps you in trouble there. So like the water heater. The water heater stops working, I've got to go and get that fixed. The air conditioner stops working in winter. I don't have to get that fixed right away. The heater stops working in winter. I've got to get that fixed right away. Vice versa, if it happens in a different season. Because you don't want somebody having a heat stroke in a house because the air conditioning's out and it's 103 degrees outside. So it's just a matter of every property management company is going to have their own way to manage things. I'm small. I've got a couple of crew around the state that I can call on and dispatch, and I keep their insurance information on file. So if anything goes wrong, I have that. But it's not, I'm not a big crew. I don't have anybody on salary. So it's just up to independent contractors that work for me. And, you go through a lot of independent contractors. You go through a lot of construction guys, GCs. It's hard to find somebody that will actually still do the job on time. So you learn how to deal with that too.
Yeah. Sure. And, I'm sure that the contracts between the landlord and the tenant are generally written to protect the landlord if the tenant like breaks a window or like
Yes.
ruins the washer and dryer or something.
So in Georgia, I can withhold from their security deposit for any damages that they have, except for normal wear and tear, right? If there's a scuff on the wall from just the couch rubbing up against it, it's kind of normal wear and tear, right? If the doorknob gets loose just from usage, that's wear and tear. If they put a hole in the drywall moving in and out, that's not normal wear and tear. I can go ahead and collect for that. If they lit the kitchen on fire, I can collect for that. If they put a Hello Kitty toy in the toilet and it jammed in the S-curve and I've got to smash the toilet open, I can collect for that. Those last two are actually real world examples. So you can. And now every management company is going to do it differently. The way I structure a lease, I have two documents. I have a management agreement or a management engagement with my owners, and then I have a lease agreement with my tenants. So I have two separate documents for the three parties. So the landlord and the tenant are not on the same document. That means the tenant doesn't have the landlord's name, doesn't have their contact information. They only have my name and contact information. And then at my office, on the other document, I have the ability I get a limited power of attorney to write that lease, and that protects. It makes it so that the tenant or the landlord doesn't know who the tenant is, so I don't have to deal with any fair housing. Because the last thing that I want is to give a landlord an application and they look at the last name and think, you know what? I don't want them in the house. That's a fair housing issue. So by taking that out, I protect the landlord from that. I protect myself from that. And I protect the tenant from that. Then by taking the landlord's information and putting that on a separate agreement with me and not on the tenant side, I'm protecting the landlord's privacy. So if the tenant wanted to sue the landlord, it's a lot harder for them to get their contact information. They can sue me, but it's harder to get the landlords. And I have a lot of hold harmless agreements in there, so it's hard to sue me unless I break the law. So there's different protections that I put. Now, on some agreements, it's all on one document. So it's up to each individual and each property management company.
Sure.
How much are you?
So I have another question, just kind of.
Sure.
It's very general. I'm not sure you'll be able to
try
give me a
I've got 100
like
real estate
pinpoint answer, but
worst questions in the world.
Is there like a general like spread or percentage that people generally see between like a mortgage and a rent? Like say there's a $250,000 house in DeKalb County. Mortgage, I guess, would be what I don't know, $1,300 a month. Is there like I guess what would rent generally be like $1,600 a month for that, or is there like a specific?
So the rule of thumb is you want the price of the property to be 10 times rent. If you can get a property that's 10 times rent, so if you're getting $1,000 a month, you want to pay $100,000 for it. If you get really 10, that was back in the day. Recently, they're not going for that. It's really hard to find that. You may pay $100,000 for an $850 a month rent. So 8.5 times, or like, I guess that would be 12 or 13 times. It's late, but somewhere in that ballpark, right? If it's 140,000, getting 1,400 a month rent, that's pretty good. That's actually really good. And that's what I have in Ackworth. Now I have 109,000 cost basis in my townhouse, and I get 900 on that. So that one breaks even.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at these properties, one, get a really good agent. You want to have representation when you're doing this, because when you're in due diligence, so say you find a property that looks like it's a solid investment, low maintenance, turnkey is $10,000 or less in maintenance. Really, you're looking at carpet and paint, and that's it to put a tenant in there. You're going to want to pull additional comps. So you're going to pull comps on the sales side, and you're going to see what things are selling for in the neighborhood. But then you're also going to pull comps on the rental side and see what things are renting for. And then it's just a matter of how much is your mortgage going to cost you? What are you willing to pay in management? And then that's it. If it makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't, I mean, you get due diligence for a reason. You want to make sure that you're able to make the numbers work. So that's why it's key to have a very good mortgage lender who knows what they're doing, and they're going to quote you accurately on what your monthly expenses will be, including taxes and insurance. And then, so you'll get that number up front during due diligence, and then you'll be able to factor in, okay, what's it going to rent for? So if it turns out, your total costs are going to be $1,100, your rent's going to be $1,200, you don't exactly have a margin there for hiring a property manager, because that's going to cost you $120 a month on a $1,200 rental. So you'll probably want to reconsider that.
Sure. So it's pretty easy to pull comps like for rentals.
If you're in a metro area with the MLS, because so in Metro Atlanta, we do list our rentals on the MLS, so we can go in and I can see what's rented for in the area. Now, am I always going to find something in the same neighborhood? Probably not, but I may be able to find something within a mile radius or a 2-mile radius that is leased in the last year that we can use as a basis for what this house should be worth.
That's good to know.
Yep. Got a few more minutes. I've blocked out till 9:30 on this. Any other questions?
None off the top of my head. I might shoot you an email or something if I have any follow-up questions.
Sounds good. All right. My email, chris@selectrealty.com. There are 2 L's in select. Go ahead and there we go. So Select Realty. Or you can send it contact@selectrealty.com. Information's right here. That's our office phone number. You can always give me a call. If you ever need anything, let me know. Always around and always on Facebook. So thanks for taking the time. I hope this helped. I really do.
Yeah, this was really helpful. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, and just I'm not really knowing where to start. So it's good to get the perspective of somebody who is an agent and a property manager, and somebody who's kind of lived the life. So this was really helpful, and thanks for taking the time to do this so late at night. It was great.
All right, Alex, I'm glad. Alex, John, thanks for joining me on the call tonight. I am going to save this video, and I'll put this online.